5 actionable tips to improve your focus. It's 9 a.m. and I've just sat down to work. I've got lots to do and I want to get going. But first, I remember I need to quickly reply to a WhatsApp message. I open my phone and see that there are a whole bunch of other WhatsApps that I need to reply to. My heart sinks. And instead of replying, I find myself opening YouTube to avoid thinking about being a bad friend. Suddenly, I've spent 27 minutes watching Ace and Gold, talking about how World of Warcraft is dead in 2024. My brain fills with guilt and frustration, and I decide I need another break before I start working, and maybe a third coffee for the day, followed by a poop. Now, this is the modern struggle. The world today is constantly competing for our time and attention. And the ability to focus has become even more difficult, and for that reason, it's even more important than ever. So in the first video of this 3-part series about focus, we talked about 5 mistakes people make when it comes to focusing. But in this video, we're going to be going through 5 actionable, evidence-based tips that you can use to improve your focus. Alrighty. Tip number 1 is to make a ready-to-resume plan. 1. The ready-to-resume plan. Now, to understand what the hell this is and why we should do it, we should look at this 2018 paper by Sophie Leroy. This paper was published in the Journal of Organization Science, and it looked at the effects of interruptions on our ability to focus. The researchers got some people together in a lab, and they got them to work on a word puzzle, which is task A, and then after a while, they interrupted them and asked them to review some resumes and select the best candidate for a job, which was task B. Now, where this gets interesting is that the researchers split the group into 2. One group was interrupted while they were doing task A and was immediately told to switch to task B. But the second group was interrupted doing task A, and before moving to task B, they were told to create a ready-to-resume plan, i.e., to make a plan of where they were during task A, the word puzzle, and what they were planning to do when they got back to it now. When the researchers measured the group's performance on task B, the resume task, they found something pretty interesting. They found that the second group, the ones who had made the ready-to-resume plan, performed significantly better on the second task. Okay, so this might be a little bit confusing to follow, but basically what's happening is that the group that made this plan of action, this ready-to-resume plan, did better on the second task, probably because they had less attention residue. Now, attention residue is this idea in the research and psychology that's been around for a while, where basically if you're focusing on one thing and then you switch to another, there is part of your brain, part of your attention that's still thinking about the previous thing that you were doing. This is part of the reason why multitasking and trying to do lots of things in one go is a terrible idea, because every time you switch task, part of your brain is still on the previous task. And so you're really like nerfing yourself by not allowing your entire brain to be focused on the thing you actually care about. But the key point of this study is that if you are going to switch tasks to something else, you want to create a bit of a plan of action so that you can resume the first task initially. And this is actually a thing that writers do quite a lot. And it's called the Hemingway Trick. And this obviously came from the writer Ernest Hemingway. But the idea is that when you're writing, you want to stop in the middle of the sentence. Never stop your writing at the end of the sentence or at the end of a paragraph. You want to sort of stop in the middle, because when you stop in the middle, the idea is that it becomes much easier to return to the thing that you were doing because you have stopped in the middle of the sentence. And I used to use this trick very extensively when writing my own book, Feel Good Productivity, with which, if you haven't checked out, you should link down below. And if you have, I would love a review, because reviews are nice. But I used to use this trick all the time when I was working on the book. And I really had to focus for hours and hours and hours on end. But I also wanted to take breaks, and I also might need to kind of check a Slack message or hop on to a team meeting. I would always make a point to stop in the middle of the sentence or in the middle of the paragraph rather than at the end, to be able to get back into the focus mode. So tangible, actionable takeaway when you are doing something and you want to do something else and get back to the thing. Create yourself a ready to resume plan, or find a way to whatever your work is for you to stop in the middle of the sentence so that the ready to resume plan is basically already created for you. 2, the 40 hertz tactic. Okay, so does listening to certain types of music affect your ability to focus? Well, this is what 2 researchers at the University of Toronto wanted to find out. And so in 2020, they decided to test whether the music at 2 different frequencies could help improve our attention. Now, this is an example of music at a 16 Hz frequency, and this is an example of music at 40 Hz frequency. And the point of their study was to test, is there a difference between how much you focus based on what frequency of music you're listening to? And so they took a group of people, as researchers tend to do, and they separated them into 2 groups. Group A and Group B. Group A listened to 40 Hz music while working for a day, and then 16 Hz music on the second day. Group B did the same thing, but in reverse. So they had 16 hertz on day 1, and then 40 Hz on day 2. And with both groups, weirdly, they found that their concentration was better on the 40 Hz day compared to the 16 Hz day. Now, apparently the reason for this is that when our brain is doing stuff that needs more mental effort, like problem solving or remembering things, it generally has a brainwave pattern between 25 and 100 hertz. But the 40 Hz frequency is particularly good for extra focus and concentration, because these are allegedly the waves that our brain produces when we're focused and doing these more difficult tasks. But for this to work, you actually have to be wearing headphones, because to create that 40 Hz frequency, these beads actually play 2 different tones each, with slightly different frequencies into each ear. And your brain hears a 3rd tone based on the differences between these 2 frequencies. And this is something called binaural beats, which is a phrase you might be familiar with if you're interested in this experiment to help improve your focus. See what it's like to put on headphones and listen to 40 Hz binaural beats, which you find on YouTube and on Spotify and a bunch of other places, and see if these things actually help you focus better. 3, the 10-minute de-clutter. Okay, this is a fun one. Let's play a little game. I'm going to show you 2 different workspaces, and I want you to have a guess as to which workspace is going to improve your ability to focus. This is round 1. Which of these workspaces do you think is going to make it easier to focus? This is round 2, same question. And finally, this is round 3. Now, here's the question. Which of these sorts of workspaces is your own desk? More similar to, do you have, like, I sometimes do random crap absolutely everywhere thrown about all over the place? Or do you have a little bit more of a Vibby cleaner, nice minimalist setup? Now, intuitively, we should hopefully feel that a cleaner, tidier workspace is actually going to help us focus. But is this actually true? Well, conveniently, that is what Professor Joseph Ferrari decided to study in a paper called Procrastinators and Clutter. Now, this is a really fun study because what they did is that they surveyed around 350 people to measure their tendency to procrastinate. But they also asked them to fill out a survey called the Clutter Quality of Life Scale, which is apparently a thing. And this scale basically asks them a bunch of questions about how cluttered and disorganized their life is, and tries to measure the negative impact of that clutter and disorganization. Now, I think that's just interesting generally, because it does actually show that the more clutter you have in your life, the more chaotic and stress you generally tend to feel. But the study also found that there was a strong relationship between clutter, i.e., having too much stuff and feeling overwhelmed by it, and our tendency to procrastinate. Now, the study doesn't go into reasons why, but like if we were to just speculate, A, it's intuitively obvious that that's probably going to be the case. And B, if we imagine our peripheral vision, if there's like loads of stuff, it's going to create lots of these open loops of like, oh, I should put that away, I should pay that bill, I should do that thing. Whereas if the space is a little bit more clean, a little bit more minimalist, and we're just focused on one thing, it allows a brain to focus on the thing. And the whole point of this 3-part video series is to help us focus. Now, this concept of clutter doesn't just apply to our physical space, but it also probably applies to a digital space as well. Like if you're one of those people who has about 10,000 tabs open on Chrome at the same time, right? Clicking on a particular tab and clicking close all other tabs is an incredibly valuable strategy for just massively improving your focus, because now your brain's not worried about all of that other stuff that you might have missed. Similarly, if your desktop is very cluttered and you have hundreds of files on there, you can just right-click, click, clean up, or arrange by stacks, whatever the system is. And now you have a nice clutter-free desktop, which is just super, super nice. And so the third strategy for improving our focus is the 10-minute declutter. If you are struggling with focus before you start a focus session, just set a timer for 10 minutes and just take 10 minutes or 7 minutes or however long you want to just declutter your workspace physically and digitally. It does not take very long, but if you get into the habit of doing this thing every day or every few days, you will end up with a space that's way cleaner, way nicer, and way more fun and enjoyable to actually work in, which is going to help improve your ability to focus. 4. The 90-20 rule. Getty images. All right, next we have tip number 4, which is the 90-20 rule. So over 50 years ago, sleep researcher Nathaniel Kamen discovered that we move through 5 stages of sleep, from light to deep, and then out again in roughly 90-minute periods at night. What's less well known than that is that Kamen also found that our bodies operate in these similar 90-minute rhythms throughout the day as well, not just when we're sleeping. So when we're awake, we tend to move from high to low alertness every 90 minutes or thereabouts. At the start of the day, we're generally full of energy and we have lots of focus. Our brain and bodies then start to burn through our stores of energy. And in about 90 minutes or so, we enter our ultra and peak, and we feel invincible and super in the flow. But while we're feeling invincible, all of these waste products from our mental and physical activity, all of these are building up in our system, and in around 90 minutes is we start to feel tired and distracted and start losing focus. And this is what's called the Ultradian trough. Now, this science of Ultradian cycles is super interesting and powerful for anyone who wants to do deep work in a very focused way now, because the brain uses up more energy than any other organ in the body. It takes about 20% of our total energy intake. The energy that we have in our brain is used quickly when we're focused and when we're working at an optimal level. And that gets us to the tip, which is the 90-20 rule, which is that for every 90 minutes is of work that you're doing, you may want to take a 15 to 30 minute break. For me personally, the way I think about this is that if I've been working for 45 minutes and start to feel myself losing focus, I know I probably need at least a 10-minute break. And if I've been deeply in the flow and I found myself working for 90 whole minutes, I will give myself a 20-minute break. These are experiments that you can apply to your own life, and you can see, does this work for me or does this not work for me? There are people who swear by the Pomodoro method, which is 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes of rest. I personally found, having run the experiment multiple times, that is not a thing that particularly works for me. I much prefer 451 or 90-20. You're putting your foot on the gas when you're focusing, and then you're taking it off when you're taking a break, and you're kind of running with this rhythm throughout the day. And it's up to you to run the experiment on your life to figure out what are the ideal timings for yourself. 5, the color coding hack. Okay, now we come to tip number 5. So you know how we talked about this idea of attention residue, the idea that if you do one thing and then you move to another thing, you're going to have some attentional residue that's sort of left behind on the first task, so that you're less likely to be able to focus on the second task. Basically, the solution to this is single tasking. It's in a work session or in a focus session. You are hopefully, ideally, just doing one thing, and one way you can implement this into your daily life is to color code your calendar. Now, hopefully, you're following your calendar and living life by a calendar, because actually creating an intention, we talked about this in the last video, creating an intention for what you want to do in a particular time block is one of the most reliable ways to actually be able to focus, because the opposite of distraction is traction. And if you don't know what you're doing, you have nothing to get distracted from. All of this stuff is a near ease, amazing book, Indestructible, which is about the science of focus and how to focus better. So for example, when I had lots to do, I was running the business and also working on my book. I knew that I couldn't just do like half an hour of book stuff and then switch to emails and Slack and then the meeting and then another half an hour of book stuff. And like when my calendar was scattered in that way, it was really, really hard to focus. Whereas what I found was that when I batched similar tasks, so for example, in the morning 9 till 1200 would be my writing block. I would color code that in blue on the calendar, for example. Then 12 more to 1 would be lunchtime. Then 1 to 1:30 would be like a little admin block for like checking messages and emails and all that kind of crap. And then maybe you've got a meeting 1:30 to 2:30, and that's fine. And then I do some work on YouTube videos, which was another type of color block because it's a different sort of skill to writing. And so I would color code that in green, for example. And so when I'm looking at my calendar for the week, I want to make sure that it looks like there are lots of big chunks that are all the same color, rather than kind of looking like a rainbow kaleidoscope of like different colors everywhere. That ensures that you're at least doing that thing where you're single tasking and focusing on one type of task at a given time. And again, just as a bonus tip, the experiment that I found that works best for me for this, that I try and make it so that most of my time is deep work time focused on a single task. But obviously, we all have random admin and random crap that comes up that we have to do in my to-do list. I make a list of all of the random admin that I need to do, and I gather that list. And when it gets to a critical mass, I will give myself a time block of 30 minutes or 45 minutes that I call my fun admin party, which kind of just tricks my brain into thinking it's fun, which is like the whole philosophy of feel-good productivity to an extent, but it tricks my brain into thinking it's fun. And it means in that 5-minute block, my only goal is to just bash through as much admin as I possibly can. And I generally do it in a coffee shop. I generally have upbeat music in the background on my headphones. And it's sort of, I'm trying to turn it into a bit of a party, because I know that like if I tried doing those little tiny boring admin things throughout the day, it would just derail my focus in all of the other more important areas of life.